Hi, I'm Don Cantor, former co-director of JLIC at Johns Hopkins University and current director at the Richmond Jewish Learning Experience in Richmond, Virginia.
And I'm Alex Ozar, co-director of JLIC at Yale University, and this is the Torah JLIC podcast. JLIC supports thousands of young Jews in their college years and beyond, providing them with the nourishment they need to sustain an upward trajectory of Jewish commitment and growth as they enter the broader world. And the animating engine of that effort, that has always been and will always be Talmud Torah, high-level, richly meaningful, thoughtfully creative Torah learning, ambitiously attuned to the realities of where our students are. On the Torah JLIC podcast, we hope to share some of that Torah with you. Thanks for listening.
Today, we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming back Rabbi Joe Wolfson to our podcast as the first returning guest.
All right.
Rabbi Joe and his wife, Corrine, are the leaders of the JLIC Tel Aviv community. And do you remember last time? Rabbi Joe's just an all-around great guy and one who's able to get a lot of things done. Right now, Rabbi Joe is working on his Abraham's House Fellowship, which is a beit midrash to serve society. And it acts as, well, word gets around. And it acts as an incubator for people who are looking to impact the world in a positive way. Rabbi Joe, welcome.
Thank you, dear esteemed colleagues, friends. We've been hanging out for nearly 10 years at this point, and it's great to hang out on a podcast again.
Thank God. Thanks for being here. Joe, there's so much we want to get to, and we may have to get to the Abraham's House thing later. We'll see if there's time. But I actually wanted to start. Tell us about Yom Kippur in Tel Aviv. I saw some pictures. They're incredibly intriguing. I want to know the story and what it meant.
Okay, I'm biased, but let's start at the end. Tel Aviv is the greatest city in the world to spend Yom Kippur.
Wow.
And most people who have not spent Yom Kippur in Tel Aviv might find that surprising. They might not think it's immediately associated with it. But let me just describe it a little bit. So Tel Aviv is thought of as a secular heart of Israel, and we can come back to that. Before one gets to anything recognizable as religious, Tel Aviv just is astonishing just in the streets. There's not a single car. There's not a plane overhead. The non-religious population of Tel Aviv do not ignore the day. They make it their own. The mitzvah of the day is to ride your bike down the road. There are games of chess at interchanges. There are volleyball matches taking place. But just the sound is, for 25 hours to be in a major global city and to not be the sound of any cars, transportation, shops, commerce. I mean, I think city planners from all over the world should be invited to Tel Aviv on Yom Kippur. So just first, and everyone's wearing white, and so just first off, like, it's an astonishing place to be. And this goes back for a long time. What you're referring to, my guess is, are the tefillot, which we are very privileged to play a role in. So there are a number of outdoor tefillot, in fact, a large number, some larger, some smaller, that take place, not during the day. They take place Kol Nidrei and Ne'ilah, primarily because of the heat. Would be too much for the daytime tefillot. I think their main origin is COVID, in which, of course, Batei Knesset said, well, we have too many people to daven. Remember that phrase? Socially distanced from one another. So we're going to do it outside. But they outlived COVID and they extended beyond it. Listeners may remember that the Yom Kippur of 2023, Tel Aviv was the flashpoint for peak of judicial reform tensions, which became religious secular tensions, which then focused on outdoor tefillot in Tel Aviv. And we don't want to go back into that now or relitigate it, but to say that a couple of years ago, these tefillot were at the center of some very painful tensions. Nevertheless, the tefillot have continued. We do ours in a square called Kikar Atarim, which is at the end of Ben Gurion, right by the sea, right by the big hotels on the coast. And it's really hard to do it justice. The place fills up in a way which is hard to describe. By the end of Ni'ilah, which was the peak moment, the police estimated that there were 5,000 there in our square. What's remarkable is, of course, this has gone well beyond the COVID need of, we can't, there were never 5,000 people coming to a single shul, obviously. Of that 5,000, I don't think more than maximum 500, maybe less, would be even semi occasional shul goers, right? The vast majority, 90%, are people who no day of the year do they step into shul. In fact, not even Yom Kippur do they step into shul, right?
But this is
And so,
outside and there are no walls.
well, exactly, and it's. I think it takes quite a mental effort for many of us, certainly those of us who grew up overseas, to separate in our mind the idea that somebody might not feel comfortable going into a shul, but at the same time might really, really want to daven, or might really, really want to be part of a prayer experience. Of course, like we associate those two with one another. The numbers were significantly higher. I think last year would have been, to the extent that we can estimate, at its peak about 4,000. So an increase of about 20%. I am very, very happy to report that there was not a hint whatsoever of the tensions that we had experienced 2 years ago, lo haya velo nivra, and that just that not even such a relief, such a joy that that was the case. And what can I say? To be able to, berov am hadrat melech, there is a power, there is a significance to praying in a great multitude, and at the risk of sounding cliched, just to be able to look around and see such a diversity of people, and to really feel that you are Am Yisrael, you are a city, you are a neighborhood davening together. Of course, it's a challenge acoustically. I lead small parts of it, including Birkat Kohanim, and you can talk about the tefillah for the Chatufim that was at the center of it, and I try to project as best as I can with it. It's a remarkable experience, and this year was as special as it's ever been.
That sounds absolutely incredible.
If you're asking about sort of the nature of this year in particular, and maybe this can bring us on to some of the other topics that we want to talk about, it's a very curious experience to ask yourself after an experience like that, were my tefillot just answered? And what I'm referring to, of course, is that, and I've lost track of what the secular date was on Yom Kippur this year, but I stood up on the chair at the end of Ni'ilah to say the prayer for the hostages. And I said, bellowing out as loud as I could, we said this tefillah last year, and, this has to be the last year in which it is said. And proceeded to say it in front of 5,000 people, and, finished Yom Kippur with, a feeling that, I don't know what you call it, that high, that energy that you have after a good Yom Kippur. And part of the advantage of it being a very mixed multitude is that a lot of people do have their phones on them. These tefillot were after the end of Ni'ilah, so there are plenty of videos floating around of it, which then get passed around. And then to watch those videos again after we've experienced, literally prayers being answered, was an experience I'm not sure like any other I've had.
Joe, you talked a little bit about even just the shifted numbers from last year to this year and over the last few years, and obviously the incredible poignancy of this moment in the last couple weeks, the last couple years. How do you see this in the broader trajectory of the Jewish character of Israel, of the relationship between the religious and the secular, and you've already really helpfully complicated our picture of what that means. And I want to know where you see it going.
You know, sometimes when you have like a realization where all the data points were there prior, you knew all of them, but suddenly you string the dots together. It hit me very hard at a certain point last week. What an astonishingly religious moment we are living in. And I don't mean that everybody is becoming dati. I don't mean that the Orthodox world is doing well and is growing in numbers like that. That's not the point. I'm not talking in a sort of a partisan sectoral way whatsoever. Simply the atmosphere, the oxygen. You'll appreciate, Alex, the music, the phrases that people say has become so religious. You know, I grew up in the UK, and part of what I really struggled with in the UK and why I didn't really see my future there as a professional Jew was because you felt like actual religious expression needed to be kept to a really private sphere. It wasn't something that could be spoken about in public. One of Tony Blair, who was famously a very religious individual, was once asked about his religion, and his spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, cut across. And he was not a part of the interview, Alistair Campbell, but he got in between the journalist and Blair and said, "We don't do God. We don't talk about God." And you know, Israel is a different story. And I wasn't here in the 90s, but one really gets the sense that, you know, if you look back at the Oslo period and, you know, the pro-Oslo camp, the anti-Oslo camp, you know, there was a very strong religious divide within it. The peace camp did not have large religious symbolism around it. Now, in our moment, the music I already mentioned is just so, you know, astonishingly religiously infused. The amount of videos of Shehechianu as, you know, so much accompanying the return of hostages, said by everybody. I watched a video today of Matan Angrest being released from hospital, and he rips the poster of himself off of his family car, and the whole crowd, who are not, you know, wearing kippot or anything like that, are just chanting Shechianu. There are other elements of it which aren't as connected to the particular sort of news cycle of the moment. I might have mentioned this to you in the past. There's been a phenomenon in Tel Aviv, maybe other cities as well, I don't know, for a few years now, of men who do not cover their heads, who quite likely have a few tattoos, who nevertheless, in the heat of Tel Aviv, are walking around with tzitzit out. And, you know, as people who wear both kippot and tzitzit, and if you live in a hot Mediterranean environment, we all know that, you know, kippah is pretty easy. And tzitzit, you think, oh, you know, like to add another layer of perspiration. And there is just this, you know, I mean, there's a song recently by an artist called Bensoul, who sort of captures this voice of this phenomenon. The song is called Dor shel Tzmeim or Neshamot Tzmeot, thirsty souls. Yesh tzitzit ein kippah is one of the lines within it. So, you know, I think the tefillot are a part of that. To come back to your question, you know, there are thousands of people wearing white, but there are also people with their dogs sitting down on the chairs at part of the tefillah. There are surfers coming back from the beach who join with their boards. You know, for someone who's really doctrinally secular in the old school sense of the word, that, you know, Zionism is about removing God from the picture and taking it all back into our hands. This is a challenging moment. I'm sure it really is, and I don't say that jokingly, but it is something quite remarkable to see.
When you said that it seems like your tefillot were answered, can you tell me what that means? God listened and like it worked, or is there's something else that you're thinking about?
I don't know. I feel we should ask Rabbi Ozar that kind of question. I'm just going to talk about it on the simple experiential sense. I mean, look, there's to slightly avoid your question. A member of our community spent the days after the hostage deal working on a beautiful piece of art that she wanted to be able to get to Ivanka Trump, which was gold leaf lettering, "Umi yodea im leit kazot higat lamalchut," the line from Megillat Esther. Who knows if for this very moment you arrived at the position that you were in? And of course, Esther is a little bit of a secularized example of what we're talking
I
about.
feel like it should
But
be Jared who's the Esther in the story, but let's just move on.
well,
Yeah.
we can debate, maybe Miriam Edelson. But what I mean to say, Don, is that obviously no one is blind to the very real world actors here, whether it be Sahal, whether it be the Trump administration. There's no denying anything of that, but just this idea that God acting versus human acting are sort of in zero sum competition with each other. And to the degree that you make space for one, you eliminate the other. That doesn't seem to be part of the discourse anymore. We speak about both with pemale, with full mouths. Does that go somewhat to beginning to think about your question?
Yes. And since you only sidestepped it, I'm going to ask a follow-up question, which is that it's remarkable that people are saying Shehecheyanu, like you mentioned, in these moments, because normally we think about Shehecheyanu as a time of great happiness, and it's being said in times of great happiness. But these Shecheyanus are being said, I'm sure there are people that are over the moon, but it's in the context of not great happiness, but the erasure of great darkness.
Well, as Alex said in the introduction, JLIC is all about Talmud Torah. That's the core. So can I share a halachic text, which I don't think is as famous as it should be, but I think it's just like one you can live with? Can we do that?
Let's
And then
do
I'll
it,
come back to the
please.
question. Okay, so well known that we have a principle called Safek Barachot Lahakel. If you're in doubt as to whether or not you should say a beracha, a blessing, you don't. Simple reason for this seems to be the prohibition of taking God's name in vain. Right? Lo tisa Hashem Hashem l'shav. So we don't say brachot if we don't know that we're supposed to say them. The Bach, the Bayit Chadash, Orach Chaim Siman Kaftet, says that is true with one exception. And the exception to the rule of Safek Brachot Lahakel is Shehecheyanu. Shehecheyanu, if you think that maybe you should say it, you're not 100% sure, but you think maybe, you should say it. Why? Because it's said over Simchat Halev. And if there is Simchat Halev, then you say it, right? Regardless of whether you might have some other technicalities which would maybe think in the classic way we say, Safek Lahakel. I mean, that's just a piece to live with, right? Like you can dine out on that, right? What is the one bracha which we would always say if we think we might have a reason to say, I'm happy to be alive, right? I'm happy to be here. Shehecheyanu v'kiyemanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. I mean, like that is just like, for me, that's just like the ultimate life-affirming piece. To your question, Don, you make a valid point, right? Isn't this at very best just getting us back to zero, right? Isn't this just like help us trying to like claw our way out of the deficit and out of the darkness, which of course we can't, right? Meaning it's never going to make up for the loss. So how are we still saying Shehecheyanu in that moment? I'll take your question as an opportunity to share something that I think is important for understanding this moment. First off, I don't know. You can tell me. I don't know how much you were able to sense this from America. I don't know how much it was you were a part of it, but for a few days, at least 48 hours, it was euphoria. ecstasy, right? It was, you know, everything got cancelled, right? Like my daughter was signed up for a pottery chug. It got cancelled because like nobody could do anything that day other than just like turn to one another. Have you seen the news? Like it not like any other day I've experienced. Something we have been praying for, and you know, it's Parashat Noach this week. When I don't know when the podcast is going to be released, but you know, the midrash says about Noach and the flood coming. Noach ma'amin v'lo ma'amin. Love that phrase, right? At one and the same time, he believed it was going to happen and he didn't believe it was going to happen. You know, I think I assume you know this, and you know, obviously Jewish communities around the world have been a part of this, but you can't walk. You know, if I walk 10 minutes in Tel Aviv, the amount of yellow ribbons, stickers, pictures, it's in the hundreds that I pass. How many of us thought that every one of the live hostages was coming back? The smart money did seem to be with the position that said, why would Hamas ever give up the last hostage? Maybe you know, drips and drabs and torture us with the slow process. And then it happened. And of all days, it happened on Simchat Torah. Right? So the feeling was ecstasy, was just jubilation, was astonishment. You know, everybody who could went to Kikar Atarim, to Hostage Square. Okay, so this is important to share, but I want to use your question to share something deep. I think something important. This came out of a conversation with a friend of mine on Shabbat, who I should give him credit for either his idea or at least being the partner for it, Elishav Rabinovich. A tremendous risk was taken by placing the return of the hostages as the priority of the war. Let's leave aside religious and moral and political calculations. On a simple educational level, to say that we are bringing them back was a kind of a crazy risk. I think the best parallel, and maybe you guys have got memories of this, would be disengagement in 2005. Obviously, a very different kind of political moment and a different part of society, but this is very well attested to in academic scholarship and journalism that for those who are in Israel and deeply opposed to the disengagement from Gaza in 2005, many voices, significant voices of authority and respect in the Dati Leumi community said, it's not going to happen. It won't happen. God will stop it from happening, right? And a whole generation of young religious Zionists experienced a major crisis of faith in the aftermath of this, because it did happen, right? And what happens when you promise something is going to happen, but which actually you've not really got much control over? You're taking a terrible gamble with the lives and the faith, you know, yes, and the way in which we speak about faith in God, but like faith just is a part of our characters. You're taking a terrible gamble, and it paid off. Like thank God, it paid off, right? And I don't want to forget for a moment the bodies of deceased and murdered hostages who have not returned. We can come on to talk about that and how sort of this joy then, you know, has to absorb another element into it as well. But just to go back to those few days, I tremble to think what would have happened if we had not had it. Right? I almost to the extent that I don't know. Like everybody now who has been a part of this journey and who has attached a yellow ribbon to a bag or to a car and said tefillot in shul or stood on a roadside with a poster, you know, all of the myriad ways, and I'm sure there are many, many diaspora examples that you can be a part, that you can share. Everybody who's been a part of this can now put their best foot forward and say, okay, it's October 8th. Here's to the next day. If that hadn't happened, if Bring Them Home had totally failed, I don't know what would have what the future would look like. But it did happen, and it happened within a very small period on the second anniversary on Simchat Torah. And so, yeah, done. Shechianu. That's why people said Shechianu. Because somehow this thing which had been prayed for and hoped for 2 years, which ma'amin v'lo ma'amin could so easily not have happened and would have crushed us, it did happen.
And to go back to Yom Kippur, so our liturgy tells us the high point of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is in Utat Tokef, and that we are praying to the God who is in control directly of whether we live or die. And most of us, most of the time, thank God, we live in reasonably safe and stable environments. Most of us don't expect to die. We're not aware and thinking about our mortality in live ways. And we have actuarial tables which tell us when things are likely to happen and when they're not, and we just follow the normal structures. And when most of the time things go well. And my sense is that those of you, especially those of you in Israel, and those of us watching from afar and feeling it, and I felt it very powerfully in New Haven, especially in those moments on Yom
Do you
Kippur.
mind, for my own interest, and maybe anyone listening from Israel, can you both share a little bit from your over the pond vantage point?
There are a couple different moments here. On the one hand, I haven't felt a Yom Kippur like the last 2 years, like anytime before. There just is a sense of poignancy and weight, and I think the right word is actually a sense of reality to it. There's this sense that we are the praying to God about life and death is not an abstraction. It's not a ritual. It's real. We feel it. We feel the stakes, and whether or not the hostages, the soldiers, everyone else is going to live or die is not just a function of the actuarial tables. Hashem's in control and deciding these things. And we need miracles, and we need to pray for them. And then what happens is going to be some kind of response or not from God. And we're going to feel it that way. And those stakes feel incredibly powerful and just real. And on the other hand, I had this very strong sense that we're not there. We're a few thousand miles away, and as much and as poignant as it feels and as real as it feels, what I'm getting is an echo, which you feel the distance. And also I think if part of our work here was like grasping on to that feeling of distance, highlighting it, seizing it, and then saying that feeling itself shows us how deeply connected we are, and we can build from that. And God willing, the reality of what the Jewish people is and our relationship with Hashem, and all of the life and death, hopes and fears that go into that, is something we can continue to grow out of. Joe, what's next? What's your next move with the JLIC Tel Aviv community, with the Israeli community, with everyone around you? You're their rabbi and spiritual guide. Where are you trying to move them? Where are you trying to move yourself so that you can move them?
It's a great question. In preparation for this, we were messaging, and Don had messaged about the Torah that's being shared at this moment. Sometimes, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. I'm sure you do have thoughts. Sometimes it feels like a bit of a tyranny that our Torah needs to be subservient to current events. Like, don't we just want to teach Torah for Torah's sake, and don't the Yamim Noraim or whichever other Chag also exist and are justified without needing to be made into vorts for our current moment? And I really do believe that. And at the same time, through this whole period until now and onward, I just want to do the regular stuff, right? We're back in Bereshit, and it would be great just to learn Bereshit for the joy of Bereshit. Maybe we can dream of being able to get back to a place where we do feel less of a pressure for every Dvar Torah and Shir to start with the words in this post-October 7th world. right? That would be great,
Joe, that's an intervention too, and I think a vital one,
right?
if you can pull
Right.
it off.
That being said, it has felt like a kind of, I think I try to do both. It has felt like a bit of a whirlwind that, the Torah relevant for the current moment was different on Yom Kippur, was different on Sukkot from what it was on Yom Kippur, and it was different on Simchat Torah from what it was on Sukkot, and it's different now, just a week or so later after Simchat Torah from what it was then. My shiur this week was took. There's another podcast that's out there which is not as well known or as listened to as JLIC Torah. It's something about some phone call being returned. I can't remember the exact name, but the Israeli
We're trying to
journalist.
give them pointers to get caught up, but we'll see.
A comment of Nadav Eyal, who had said that, alongside the joy is a great sadness, a sadness at those who haven't returned, a sadness at the violence that we've been exposed to. That triggered a thought for my teaching this week, in which I tried to present both Noach and Avraham as also dealing with destruction, with the flood, with Sodom, and what do they do the day after? What do they get up and make of their world? And of course, Noach is a tragic figure in this regard. He's not able to really make a go of it, and you can say it's shock, it's depression, it's PTSD, maybe it's guilt. And Abraham does something quite different. First off, Abraham prays. This is something I thought for years, but it felt very powerful to share it this week. Well known is the opinion that the 3 daily tefillot are established by the Avot: Avraham, Shacharit, Yitzchak, Mincha, Yaakov, Ma'ariv. But the Gemara in Brachot gives a verse for each one, right? And what is Avraham's verse? Now, actually, Vayashkem Avraham Baboker comes up quite a few times in the Avraham stories, or there are multiple points in Avraham's life where he prays. Maybe you think the Akedah is a prayer moment. I always thought the classic prayer moment is the arguing with God at Sodom. But actually, and I've not found anyone that makes much of this, but it seems to just be like blindingly beautiful and brilliant. The verse that Chazal, the Gemara in Brachot Daf Kafvav, picks to say Abraham establishes Shacharit is Vayashkem Avraham Baboker, and he goes back to the place and he overlooks Sodom and he sees Sodom smoking and in ruins. That is his prayer. It's the prayer the day after, right? It's not the prayer to prevent the destruction of Sodom. It's the going back after he's lost the battle, and after he's seeing devastation, and it's his prayer in that moment which becomes the template, the origin of Shacharit. That to me is mind blowing, right? That's the moment that we're in, right? This is the day after, right? Going up. Karine, my wife today, actually spent the day in the south in these terrible places, and the cemetery of cars and the dumpster at Nova that has been maintained, and that's Abraham overlooking destruction and prayer in that moment. So there's lots of important Torah in the deep sense and sort of spiritual work for now. But I think what I'm most energized by and what's on my mind is the feeling that alongside the terribleness of the last 2 years, remarkable things have happened. Connections have been made. People have mobilized, have worked harder than they ever could. Civil society, I think, has done remarkable things. And the question is, what now? Like, how do you harness that energy and those relationships, and how do you take them to? How do you not let it just, fizzle out or devolve into partisanship or something like that? And how do you make that? So we have certain plans and ideas which I can share if you like, but that to me seems to be that what we need to think about for JLIC for our community in Tel Aviv, but I think it's exactly the same question for really Israeli society as a whole, and probably in a slightly different way for global Jewry as a whole.
It makes me incredibly excited for our next check-in.
Part three.
Yeah. Joe, thank you so much for this, and especially for everything you're doing up there on the ground.
Thank you. B'simcha. My joy, my pleasure. Always good to feel part of the big JLIC family, which we are merit to be a part of.
Thanks a lot.